So when I prepared this speech with my deputy, he told me, okay, you should start with a nice anecdote, something to break the ice, say when you were commanding officer of Destroyer Provence, something happened to you, and so on and so on. And I thought about it, and all the anecdotes I had regarding electronic warfare are classified and sensitive. So I'm afraid I will not start with this ice-breaking story, sorry. But the recent events remind us about the threats that naval units face. And because they operate on the high seas, they are regularly evolving within range of anti-ship missiles, whether these missiles come from another destroyer or a fighter bomber, coastal batteries, and so on. So that's the result of an assumed decision sailing in these areas. We are permanently assessing the risks, and we take the responsibility for how and where we operate our units. Sorry, I should have started by telling you that it was allowed to take pictures and video footage and so on. No problem. So with these anti-ships missiles, our competitors try to set a strategy designed to deny us the access to common areas. They call it anti-access area denial, A2AD. And in the French Navy, we refuse this term. We refuse both the idea and the way it is practiced. Because if we accepted it, it would mean that the adversary would have won. His strategy of denial would have worked. So our units are designed for combat. And they are designed to operate and to sail in dangerous areas. They are designed to enter contested areas. And denying this strategy of A2AD means that we have to be able to operate in these so-called A2AD areas. And we have to be able to avoid the threats or to defend ourselves against them. So before tackling the subject, I would like to dwell on the threat itself, the missile threat. In 1967, the Egyptian strike that sunk the Israeli frigate Eilat during the Six-Day War brought us brutally into the era of anti-ship missiles. And since then, the capabilities of anti-ship missiles have constantly evolved along two main axes. The first one is their mobility, the range, the speed, the terminal maneuvers, all designed to make it more difficult for them to be intercepted by anti-aircraft weapon systems, what we call hard kill. So this is, for example, the strategy that was developed by the Russians, whose missiles have constantly gained speed. And they had supersonic missiles as early as in the 70s. And then the second axis is the performance of their seeker. So the seeker is the radar in the head of the missile. That is to say, the ability of the missiles to detect a target with precision and then to reject all the electronic or infrared countermeasures that can be opposed to it. In other words, the aim is to make it more difficult for our electronic warfare systems to decoy the missile. And that's what we call soft kill. So hard kill, you destroy the missile, soft kill, you decoy it. Okay, that being said, let's have a look at self-protection and electronic warfare. Before going into detail on the essential characteristics of an electronic defense system, I would like to make two digressions because they seem quite important to me. The first one, I just want to emphasize that before self-protecting against a missile, you must first detect it. Well, that seems obvious, but it's quite important. So we therefore need radar, infrared, and electronic warfare sensors. So I will not go further on this because it's not the topic here today, but it's important to keep in mind. A good initial detection, that is to say, as soon as possible, with a good quality tracking, and with as much information as possible. So you want to know the altitude, the flight speed, the type of the seeker of the missile, its infrared signature, and so on. So as much information as possible. It is both a prerequisite and a performance factor for self-protection. The second thing I would like to say is I would like to recall the need for electronic defense as a complement to anti-aircraft weapon systems, what I mentioned before as hard kill. So, for example, the Aster system, which is the anti-air missile that you can find on the French warships, they are now a remarkable and mature capability. But in addition, electronic countermeasures, ECM, that hamper the incoming missile homing capability are absolutely essential. And this is no surprise. Common sense dictates that you should always dispose of redundancy. In combat, you will always want to put all the chances on your side. So it's not about choosing if you want to use hard kill or soft kill. Use both if you can. So for these reasons, it seems essential to me to have several layers of hard kill and soft kill defenses that complement each other. So in addition to the layers constituted by the Aster system and by the short-range artillery, we need a good electronic defense layer. It provides a significant operational gain for a relatively low operating cost, for example, in terms of training. And this electronic defense layer offers significant advantages. The first one is that even before the first missile is flying, it can be used to hamper indirect threats, like, for example, the surveillance or the attack radars of the enemy, whether they are airborne or not, and that through various possible deceptions effects, like, for example, trying to mask your force or your intentions, or to blur the situation as it is perceived by your enemy. Another advantage is that electronic defense offers a wide range of complementary layers itself, because the decoy tactics can be carried out at different phases of the missile attack. So, for example, before it is launched, when it is launched, before it turns on its seeker, and so on and so on. So you have a number of tactics, distraction, seduction, and so on. I will not enter into the details, but that offers another number of layers. Okay. Now it's beginning to be too technical, so I will not go further on that. But it's important to have that in mind. So what are the main characteristics that we expect from electronic warfare defense system? The first one, obviously, is efficiency. This is the main and more obvious one, but let's talk about that. So our electronic warfare systems have reached today an excellent level of performance against many proliferating threats. And that's thanks to, first, the design of our warships, because we have greatly optimized their radar signature, and the less the radar signature, the more efficient is your system, is your electronic warfare system. Thanks to the power of our jammers, thanks to the capacity of our decoy launchers, and thanks to the overall intelligence of our combat systems. And all of this is due to the excellent know-how of the French and European defense industry, like, for example, Naval Group, Thales, Electronica, Lacroix, and so on. Some of them are here today. Thank you for protecting us. And also, electronic warfare systems are programmable, which means that they allow us to respond appropriately to different threats. And the synergy in this area between the DGA, which is the French procurement agency, you've met them yesterday, and the French Navy needs to be noted. Then the second characteristics of our systems that we praise is the ability to deal with a wide range of threats. For a long time, we have tried to develop dedicated tactics for each particular missiles. So, for example, you had one specific waveform from your electronic jammer for each type of different seeker of the incoming missile. So the difficulty of that strategy was that not only it's quite expensive because you have to develop a lot of different systems, but it's not always very efficient because the risk is to be always running behind the threats. So each time the opponent develops a new threat, you need to enter into a cycle which is the knowledge of the threats and then develop the solution, and then implement it in our systems. And that cycle is quite long. So at the end, when you have a working systems, the enemy has developed a new weapon. So efficient, but sometimes too late. And the approach today is rather different. It is rather to develop generic tactics with generic tactics which target a threat perhaps less precisely, but which make it possible to deal with a wider range of threats with sufficiently high probabilities of success. And then the last characteristic that we expect from our systems, as for all modern systems embarked on our warships, we expect the electronic warfare systems to be reliable, easily sustainable even at sea, and also systems that can be updated regularly as soon as needed. And in addition, we also need systems that are easy to train, including with simulators and through tactical data links. And today I think we have quite a very, as I said before, a very effective system in the French Navy. So as a conclusion, I would like to look at the longer term. And in the longer term, we will probably want to take advantage of high-powered jammers, also what we call directed energy weapons, and to include them in all the self-defense layers that I mentioned. So warships have the capacity to produce the electric energy and all the supporting systems like the cooling systems that are necessary for the implementation of these weapons, of these directed energy weapons. And because they do not require ammunitions, in some cases, they might be an interesting alternative to hard-kill systems. Once again, we will want to use both. Make all the chance, take all the chance on our side. And also, these systems will allow for a gradation of effect, which can be very helpful. And finally, they will probably be part of the response that we need to develop in the face of the threats posed by UAVs. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes my brief, and I would be happy to reply to a few questions if we have time. We have mics arriving.
Good morning, it's Richard Scott from James. Where do you see jammers going in the future? Do you see them still being on-board ships, or do you see them going off-board ships?
Both. They would stay on board ships, I think. That's my point of view. We need to keep them on board ships because, as I said before, they are really one part of all the defense layers, and we don't want to do them. We don't want to do without them. But now, yes, that's a good question. There is probably opportunities to put them out of the ships, maybe on UAVs or on maybe on USVs, unmanned surface vehicles. So other ships, but inhabited ships, for example, and that should be part of the solutions against new threats.
That was going to be a follow-up question. Are you working at ideas and concepts for a more persistent electronic defence using autonomy and uncrewed vehicles? Is that something you're looking at in your research programs?
So I should have started by saying that I'm in charge of naval warfare here in the headquarters in Toulon. So I'm mainly thinking and working on the tactics that we use and the doctrine. I'm working with my colleagues in the program branch, but I'm not a specialist on what they are developing. So I don't want to say something that's not accurate enough. But hopefully, yes, they are working on many different solutions.
Tom Whittington, Armada. You mentioned having a more generic approach in terms of attacking anti-ship missile waveforms, radar waveforms. Where do you see the place of cognitive computing and cognitive approaches for EW within that? Is that something you're looking at?
What do you mean by?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about harnessing artificial intelligence and machine learning in terms of waveform recognition, getting the software to recognize what waveform it's seeing and then to compose the response to that in terms of smart jamming. Is it something that you're looking at? Is it in terms of future threats?
So once again, I'm not into the programs, I'm more than in tactics. So I don't know exactly what they are working on. I've heard, just like you, these ideas. They are probably something that can work quite well because it will be adapted to the threats. And of course, as for every other part of the industry and so on, in the Navy it's the same. Data is the new gold, is the new oil, sorry. So we are working in the French Navy on a number of programs to make sure that we can collect all the data that we, to gather all the data that we collect on warships and to be able to make it something useful. So that's probably another way to deal with the threats in the future. Yes, I would hope so.
Commandant Xavier Vasseur, Naval News. Since you are into tactics, what are your tactics to protect a ship from incoming missiles when the ship doesn't have decoy launchers or jammers? And I'm thinking, of course, of the FDI.
So, sorry, I didn't.
What are your tactics to protect the ship from incoming missiles when you don't have decoy launchers on the ship or jammers, which is the case of the FDI?
If we don't have them, the only one we have is a hard kill, of course. And once again, the Aster system is very, very efficient. But obviously, without electronic warfare systems, yes, it will have to be mainly based on hard kill, yes. And of course, all the tactics that you can develop before that to avoid being detected, and that covers many ideas about how do you protect yourself from satellite detection, from how to use the AIS, the automatic identification systems. How do you try to hide your intentions to the enemy?
And regarding hard kill, how do you explain? I guess it's a French Navy culture, but the lack of close-in weapon systems on board French Navy ships. Is that because historically the EW part was really good, as you said?
Yeah, maybe that's one of the reasons. But the 76mm gun it's not a point defense system, but it's quite efficient in quite a number of cases.
Thank you.
Just one more question.
It's Ioannis Nikitas from Greece Defense Review JAR. How important is ECM system on board of the ship? Because we've seen FDI project, the ships don't have ECM yet.
As I said, it's one part of the different layers you can have, and obviously depending on the type of ships, small, big, and the missions and the areas where they are going to be sent, and the budget you have, it's always a matter of budget at the end. You have to make choices. So yes, we don't have ECM on all of our warships, but I would love to.
Thank you.
Okay, last question, please.
Oh, last one.
Okay, you can. Do the French Navy are working on collaborative EW? I mean, all distributed EW through the ships, aircraft, etc., to have a complete picture in real time?
Okay, that's another one. I don't have the exact reply to that. I'm just like you. I've read a few things about that, but I'm not taking any risk to give you a wrong reply on that one. Sorry.
I'll be really quick, but you mentioned obviously about you were in charge of looking at tactics and tactical training. How do you do the hard kill and soft kill integration currently, and how do you see that perhaps evolving in the future?
So a few years ago, we had sometimes on some of our ships to choose between hard kill and soft kill because in some cases they will interfere one with the other. On modern ships like the Frem, for example, the one I was in command, it's been solved. That issue has been solved, and you can use both hard kill and soft kill at the same time for the same incoming threats. And we are training regularly using both. And for example, you have incoming threats that can be represented by a small UAV, which will represent missile, and at the same time you can have within threat a false seeker that will trigger the electronic warfare system. And so you can both use your electronic warfare defense system on it and then destroy the UAV with your guns, for example.